All right, Simon. So we're so super excited to have you here with us. You can see by the standing room only audience. I can truly say, last week we announced you as the speaker, and based on the number of Teams messages, text messages, and phone calls that I got, there are hundreds of people out there who wish they could switch places with me today.
Oh,
so
thank you so much
for being here.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, so we're going to jump in. One thing I want to say, I get the honor of being up here on the stage, but we want to make sure this dialogue is engaging with the audience as possible. So I believe there might be a QR code up there on the screen behind me. Throughout my fireside chat, please feel free to enter your questions into the log system, and we're going to save some good time at the end to take those questions from the audience, and that way you guys can have a chance to participate as well. So Simon, let's jump in. The topic, it's optimism. So you've created a company called the Optimism Company, and I recently discovered your podcast, which is also named A Bit of Optimism. Our CEO, Bill McDermott, loves to say optimism is the only free form of stimulus. So can you tell us a little bit more about how optimism is an agent for building a strong leadership culture, and maybe give us an example of optimism in action?
So I think, first of all, let's define what the term is. I think people misunderstand what it means, and I'm often accused of being naive or unrealistic, which is sometimes true. But optimism is not the same thing as blind positivity. You know, blind positivity, everything's fine, everything's good, and I think a lot of leaders make the mistake that they have to be positive all the time, regardless of what's happening, in order to keep their team positive or inspire people, which is just not true. Sometimes it can be actually a toxic positivity, which is getting a lot of ink these days. But also when times are objectively hard and your boss is coming in, you're sort of bouncing off a wall saying everything's fine, it can actually make us feel worse, because there must be something wrong with me if my boss is positive and I'm just not feeling it. That's not what optimism is. Optimism is the undying belief that the future is bright. And it is entirely realistic. And so an example of optimism, you can walk into your team, you can say, these are the toughest times we've ever had. I don't know how long we're going to be in this dark tunnel. I know there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I know that if we work together and take care of each other, we will get through this and come through this better than we went in. That's optimism. And that's inspiring to hear that. But it allows for darkness and difficulty.
So that difference between optimism and positivity, you mentioned something called toxic positivity. Can you share a little bit more?
Well, toxic positivity is what I said a moment ago, which is it's sometimes overwhelming, and it's sometimes when somebody's trying to be positive all the time, it is dismissive of how somebody else may be feeling. You know, when you come in and you're trying to be your whole self, and your whole self might be, I'm struggling today. I'm going through some stuff at home. There's some family stuff, and I'm struggling. Or these market conditions are beating me up, and I don't know what to do. And if somebody in a leadership position says, "Buck up," you know, everything's going to be fine. It's dismissive of how somebody feels, and it'll destroy morale. It'll make them feel worse. It'll make them feel unseen and unheard.
So I think great way to start on the optimism tone. I wanted to set a little bit of context for you for the rest of the discussion. In preparation, I reached out to a few of my sales leader colleagues out there in the audience, and I asked them, what is going to be most valuable for you to hear from a world-renowned leadership expert? At the time, I couldn't say
he wasn't available. So.
There was a common overarching theme in this feedback that I got, and it's how to be a great leader in an environment of dynamic and hypergrowth.
Yeah.
So let me give you a couple stats that might kind of set some context for what type of growth ServiceNow is experiencing. So first, our stock is at an all-time high. I know we're all watching that. Our revenues are one of the fastest growing in the industry. We've doubled our number of employees from just 2020. We officially joined the Fortune 500, and we're leading the narrative on Gen AI in the industry. Pretty amazing. And in fact, there's a lot of new people in this room. When you join ServiceNow, you're told, welcome to the rocket ship. It's truly embedded in our culture. And as exciting as that is, which it is, when you're flying high, the expectations keep climbing higher and higher and higher.
Sure.
And undoubtedly, when you're growing at that pace, you experience some growing pains.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you've seen as a people leader, as everyone in this room is.
Yeah.
What is their role in protecting culture in a company that is experiencing this rapid and dynamic growth?
So I approach the world with an infinite mindset. And just to take a quick aside for what I'm talking about, I'll define what that means. In the mid-1980s, a philosopher and theologian by the name of Dr. James Carse defined these two types of games, finite games and infinite games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and agreed upon objective, football, baseball. If there is a winner, necessarily there has to be a loser or losers, but more important, there's always a beginning, a middle, and an end. Then you have infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players, which means you don't necessarily know who all the other players are, and new players can join the game at any time. The rules are changeable, which means every player can play however they want, and the objective is to stay in the game as long as possible. We are players in infinite games every day of our lives, whether we know it or not. Nobody's ever going to win education. It'll never happen. Nobody wins learning. Nobody wins career. And definitely there's no such thing as winning business, right? Nobody's declared the winner of business. When Circuit City went bankrupt, Best Buy didn't win anything. But when you listen to so many leaders, it becomes abundantly clear that they don't always know the game they're playing, and they talk about being number one, being the best, or beating their competition. Based on what? Based on what agreed upon metrics, objectives, and timeframes. And this is a problem, because when we play to win in a game that has no finish line, when you play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, there are very predictable and consistent outcomes. The big ones are the decline of trust, cooperation, and innovation. So, whenever I hear somebody say, "We're this, look at this, we're the best," and when you can see a little smirk on my face as you were reading the list, is because what goes through my mind is, "For now."
Oh.
Which is, those things are true, celebrate them, pat yourself on the back, absolutely enjoy them, you earn them, you work hard for those accomplishments, but they cannot last forever. It's all for now. And I think understanding that accomplishment or rocket ships are all for now, A, keeps you humble, which I know is a value of yours. A, keeps you humble, but B, it makes sure that you stay on your game. I think humility, and let's define humility. My favorite definition of humility is by a guy named Bob Gaylor, who was the 5th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, who just recently died. But Bob Gaylor said, "Don't confuse humility for meekness." He said, humility is being open to the ideas of others. And so it's not the aw shucks. You can have a big ego and fool yourself and think you're awesome, but if somebody says, "I have an idea," it's the humble one that says, "Let's hear it." Or who actually thinks other people's ideas actually have merit, sometimes. And that's what keeps you ahead of the game for longer, which is that you're never complacent, you believe there's always room to improve, and your biggest competitor is yourself. That you're actually not competing against anyone else on the market, you're competing against yourself. And how can you outdo yourself in culture, in training, in leadership, in culture, all these other things, and all your other traditional metrics. That's what keeps you ahead of it. But it really is humility is one of your greatest assets.
Great insights there. You did mention it, humility and being, specifically we say, humble yet hungry is one of our values. So let's dive in a little bit to that a little bit more. Purpose, culture, values, they're all such important rallying points for us in any organization. They really do, for ServiceNow, define our why. I talked about humble and hungry. Another value that we have is win as a team. And you could truly feel it when Paul was up here talking about our results, et cetera, and the fact that we're all together playing this infinite game together as a team. But in our latest employee voice survey, where we go out to all 23,000 plus of our employees every year, one of our lowest ranking scores on that survey was collaboration. Not only was it one of the lowest ranking, it was one of the fastest declining scores. we've inadvertently created silos in this hypergrowth. What advice would you have for this audience on being world-class collaborators, either as leaders or as individuals in this environment? And could you share some examples of other organizations that have overcome this collaboration challenge?
Well, one of the challenges we had that has hurt collaboration across the board was lockdown. I mean, when we all went into lockdown, you know, Isaac Stern, the famous violinist, said, music is what happens between the notes. Well, trust is what's built between the meetings. You know, it's the chatter as you're walking into the meeting, it's the meeting that happens after the meeting as you're walking out, it's the bumping into someone in a hallway going, oh, I meant to tell you, it's you want to grab lunch, you want to grab a coffee. It's all those little innocuous things that by themselves do nothing, but over the course of time build trust and actually support collaboration. When we work at home, we just have the meeting. There is no between. And so I think the best, I heard this from Sarah Kubrick, the millennial therapist, who I love what she said, which she said, remote teams are like long-distance relationships. You know, it's like you're on the phone the whole time, and you actually have to work much harder at building trust. You actually have to create artificially the betweens. And so when you start to have siloing, and fast growth does that because you're so focused on the numbers, sometimes you forget some of those things that you used to focus on. It happens. We forget that scale breaks things. It's not unique to you. It's it's a thing. A, you have to be prescriptive about it. B, you're going to get the behavior you reward. And so are you rewarding and recognizing people who are collaborating? Or are you only recognizing and rewarding people who are hitting numbers regardless of their collaboration? Because then you'll create a culture where the collaboration comes second. And so recognition and rewards is a big part of it. And if you have blended teams and sort of remote and hybrid teams, more effort is actually required for it. I like sending people around, like if they're not all coming to an office, I like making people like meet in a city to have a hackathon for 2 days to work a project or work a problem. That works wonders. And quite frankly, stuff like this. The biggest value of these next couple of days is not anything you're going to learn on the stage. It's this. And I cannot stress enough, please, I beg of you, during the breaks, when there's coffee, all of that, don't go wander off into a corner to check your email. Right? Because you're missing the point. It's getting to know people you don't know. It's putting a face to somebody you've only seen on a screen from across the country. The relationships that you build, even if you get behind on your email over these next 2 days, will pay dividends over the year.
Okay, you've just introduced a topic that we were debating as a team with whether we were going to proactively bring up or not, and it's around return to office. You've touched on it a little bit in terms of there's certain environments like this where it's invaluable to be with your teammates, and we're all sales folks, so we're in front of customers together as a team all the time. But as an organization as a whole and as leaders as a whole, we're working on managing teams that want more flexibility in terms of how they work and where they work. What's your philosophy on this whole topic of return to office? Sorry, HR folks, I wasn't supposed to ask that.
Do you want the good news or the bad news?
Both.
All right, so let's do the bad news first. The bad news first is it's not over. No one has figured it out. And we are in a period of flux, and the dust has not settled since we started going back to work. You have a young generation, some of whom who started work during COVID. They got their first job in lockdown, and they don't realize the value and don't know the value of in person, and they refuse to come to work. I know somebody who's really smart, works for a good company, she likes her company, she likes the culture, and she's told me that if they make me go back to work, I'll quit. It's also a generation that's not really afraid of quitting. Many people in this room, as we came up through the ranks, we wouldn't dream of quitting without having another job lined up. You just have lots of dental appointments, Why are you dressed up for work today, Simon? We've all done it. they'll quit without another job. It's mind-blowing to us. And so it's very hard to make a rational argument. And worse, they're suffering mental health challenges, and then they come into work and they freak out. They don't realize it was being home alone that created that challenge. And so not enough time has passed. So we're not through the woods yet of the complication. Okay, here's the good news. When they have it, they like it. And like even we have young people on our team who, they're very cynical about the whole in-work thing, in-person thing. And we had a company offsite, and none of them wanted to leave, and they begged us to do it again. They wanted to do it more often. And it was so much fun when you actually get to be in it, or when you get to do a hackathon and you get to solve a problem with people in person, and you get to see how creative you are and how much more fun it is. And so part of it is experimenting. If you do have plans to go fully back to work, the best strategy I've seen was a company that wanted to make everybody come back to work, but they didn't make a grand pronouncement that everybody has to come back to work. They didn't do it partial, and then they we're going to do it full soon. They didn't do that either. The CEO said, I'm making one demand, which is my most senior tier of leaders. They have to come back to work 5 days a week. They're at a certain level. They don't get to question it. You're part of the company. That's it. That's my only demand. You have to come back to work. Everybody else is hybrid. Turns out when your boss comes to work every day, this level just starts coming to work more.
Imagine.
And then when this level starts coming to work more, turns out this level starts coming to work more. And before you knew it, everybody was back at work. But flexibility is here to stay, that's for sure. It used to be, we're like, can I work from home from Friday? Now you just send an email and say, I'm working from home from Friday. That's here to stay, and I think that's a good thing.
So role modeling that behavior from the top and creating dynamic environments that make people want to
and
come.
create little opportunities where you're not forcing people to come back to work, but you're showing them the value of working with each other in, like I said, a hackathon type environment. I think those are invaluable and magical, especially for young people, to really get to enjoy the feeling. Even if they complain on their way there, they'll come back asking to do another one on the way back.
That's awesome.
We've seen it happen.
All right, Simon, so my next couple of questions are going to be delving into this topic of people and talent a little bit deeper. So some people might say it's cliche, but it's true that the foundation of any great organization is its people. We heard Bill said that there on the video just a few minutes ago. What Bill, our CEO, also likes to say is that we only hire 9s and 10s.
Yep.
And we just got ranked by Glassdoor as number 3 in terms of great places to work. And if Frank Sophia is out there, number 1 in the high-tech category. I had to say that. But the true reality for all of us on the ground is that while we have this great, amazing team that we built, we're not hiring fast enough, and sometimes we just don't get it right.
Yeah.
So, as a leader out there, when you find yourself with all these high performance expectations, but you end up with a low performer or set of performers on your team, how do you deal with that?
Okay, so great question. Just as a quick aside, I wanted to share something that I learned, which I love. There was a company that tracked the lifetime performance of all its employees back to the internal recruiter who gave them their job. And what they discovered is that their best recruiters sometimes get it wrong, and their worst recruiters never get it right. So you're either a great judge of character who occasionally makes a mistake, or you're a bad judge of character who even the statistics are not on your side, right? So I just thought that was interesting. Take that for what it's worth. So performance. When you hired somebody with good intentions, and this is one of the problems with being a fast-growing company, which is you've got to get people in seats, and sometimes you speed up the process, and so you didn't date long enough, and now you're married, and you're like, So there's a few things. One, are they truly an underperformer is question number one. Are they, maybe they're in the wrong place. Maybe there's pressures on them that we don't know about. So my knee-jerk is always empathy, start with empathy, and always coaching. And my rule is, if they're uncoachable, and we just made a mistake, and we have to let them go, the reality is someone who's struggling at work isn't enjoying work. And we want our people to come to work. You're proud of your Glassdoor. That's a big deal. Glassdoor rankings. That's a big deal. It's a big deal that people want to be here, right? And if somebody's unhappy, that gloom has ripples. And at the end of the day, we want them to be happy and we want them to thrive. It's a wonderful feeling to come to work and feel like you can contribute to something. And so if you're going to let them go with dignity. You know, in other words, you bear some responsibility because you mishired. And it happens. And so we can't build a legal case against them about their underperformance and you get out because we're destroying their self-confidence on the way out, which is just unfair, especially when you bear some of the responsibility. So be generous, let them go with dignity, and be honest. I know you're struggling. I know you're not having a good time because we're not having a good time, and it's never been the case that one of us is struggling and the other one's perfectly fine, you know? And so we want you to thrive. We want you to be happy. It's not working out here. Let us help you get another job. Though this is a little bit extreme, one of my favorite examples of a company that did it right, this was a mass layoff situation, which is completely different, but how they did it with dignity, was Airbnb, which is during the pandemic, of course, they were slammed. And so they resisted, but it came to the point where they had to, it was existential, and they laid off a huge percentage of their company. But what they did was, first they were generous, but secondly, the day it happened, they put up a website, airbnb.com/talent, and put everybody's resumes without asking on a public site, and every one of them just got whipped up. And having ServiceNow on your resume is a sales pitch. It's worth something. And so how do we help them land on their feet? You know, how do maybe you have a ServiceNow.com/talent, you know, that somebody can go, that the world can go to and snap them up, as opposed to dropping them in LinkedIn or something, you know. So just if you made a mistake, it's fine. Help them land on their feet and let them go with dignity. That's all.
All right, empathy, generosity, and I bet you that Airbnb example and the reason they did that was because that was instilled in their culture.
It's in their values. It is absolutely in their values, 100%.
Okay.
And by the way, how you let somebody go also ripples, you know, where somebody will say, look, it didn't work out, but I'm still really grateful that I had a few months run at that company, you know.
Because they become alumni out there in the
Because they
market.
become alumni, and because you treated them with respect and dignity, they carry that.
Absolutely.
If we build a legal case against them and tell them that they're such underperformers, they will have nothing nice to say.
Absolutely. All right, keeping on this discussion around talent, let's talk a little bit more about maintaining a high-performing team and developing next-generation skills in this evolving landscape. So we ask a lot of our people here at ServiceNow. One, we're telling them, lead the way in Gen AI. We're telling them, sell to the C-suite all the time, sell end-to-end solutions, and of course, hit your number quarter after quarter. How do you think of the role of a leader in identifying and closing skills gaps, and when these skills are always evolving, and the ability to identify, close those skills gaps needed for future success while balancing against meeting that quarterly number?
Okay, how many people am I going to offend here?
Uh-oh. Not me.
I'm not going to say anything that everybody doesn't already know, right? Which is, you're playing a long game here. And sometimes the quarterly numbers work out and sometimes they don't. And the example I would go back is to IBM. A few years ago, pre-COVID, IBM missed its numbers. And the CEO made a video, an internal video, basically publicly scolding the sales team and telling them that they have to work harder, and it leaked, turns out. And it was really awful. And I remember meeting some folks from IBM, and I go, hey, I saw the video. They go, oh, glad I'm not on the sales team. It's worth noting that it was the first quarter that IBM ever missed in something like 168 quarters. Wow. And it was something preposterous. And the reaction from senior management was to scold the sales team, as opposed to saying, don't worry about it, it's one quarter, you'll make it the next time. And that's my point, which is to just be realistic about what growth looks like and what quarterly numbers are like. Sometimes it's in your control, sometimes it's not. I mean, markets have forces. Clients go through different difficulties and they make sales cuts in various places, and sometimes you're on the chopping board. And I think the whole idea is being realistic and keeping your eye on the prize, that if you're accountable, okay, let's improve that. infinite game. We know what went wrong. Let's fix it so we don't make the same mistake next time, as opposed to scolding people for missing numbers. It's a game of constant improvement. And when it comes to sort of like, that's the big one. I mean, quarterly numbers. I mean, focused on the quarter at the expense of everything is a dangerous game, and a lot of companies play that dangerous game. But focusing on the long term and using the quarters to help you measure speed and distance, it becomes like the mile markers of a marathon, which is you might not meet every mile time, but you're running a good marathon. And so I like to think of quarterly numbers as markers rather than absolutes. And at the end of the day, trend data is what matters most. It's the momentum that you're carrying, the trend. We're trending in the right direction. We missed a quarter, like the IBM example. Don't worry about it. It's one. If you start having quarter after quarter of problems, okay, what can we fix? Clearly we have a problem, let's work on it. But you're talking about teamwork. We're gonna celebrate successes and we're gonna fix problems together. And I think the more people feel like they're a part of the solution as much as they can be celebrated as a team for the successes is a major way to succeed more often over time. And at the risk of completely exhausting this answer, I learned something valuable from the Marine Corps. Any Marines in the audience? Couple? Yep. Okay. So I went to OCS in Quantico, Virginia, which is where the Marines select their officers. And they do something called the LRC, which is the Leadership Reaction Course. It's basically 20 mini obstacle courses. Things like take all your, men and material over this, 3 planks of wood of different sizes over this pond, water hazard they call it, within a finite period of time. And they run it twice. One they choose a leader, one they don't. And I'm standing next to the drill instructor while they're running these exercises, and nowhere on the checklist, on the grading list, does it say if the Marines made it to the other side, if they had mission success. I know. Not even a checkbox, not even a yes, no, right? And I leaned over to the drill instructor and I said, you don't care if they succeed? And the drill instructor said, we know that sometimes bad leaders achieve mission success and sometimes good leaders suffer mission failure. We only care if they practice good leadership, because good leaders will enjoy success more often over time. I said, well then, if you're not measuring success, how do you measure if they're good leaders? He said, based on the characteristics of good leaders. And so you touched on it, which is, are you teaching people how to lead? Are you teaching the necessary and essential skills, those human skills, that will have a team perform at higher levels more often, that will have individuals perform at higher levels more often? Are you teaching, as people make their way through the ranks, listening skills, how to give and receive feedback, how to have an effective confrontation? That's a big one. Like, what if your boss screws up and you need to you have to have a confrontation up the chain of command? What if you need to give harsh criticism to somebody who works for you? How do you know that they're going to listen to you, as opposed to shut you out and curse you in their mind while you're talking to them? Those are skills. And I've never met a great leader in my entire career. And I've met folks at senior levels who have big egos and all the things, but every single one of them does not think they're an expert in leadership. They all consider themselves students of leadership. And they're all obsessed with learning. They read books, they read articles, they watch talks, and if you hang out with them, they talk about leadership. It is an obsession. They are all students. And we have to create students of leadership in our organizations, and then all the numbers take care of themselves.
That culture of continuous learning, that's the infinite game.
That's the infinite game. And like I said, the numbers will follow. And can I just pay you big props? I want to pay you, as a company, I want to pay you a huge compliment. I've never met a leader who doesn't believe their people are important, right? Never. The question is, where on the list? And the number of corporate events I've gone to where they say, here are our priorities. Number 1, growth. Number 2, our shareholder. Number 3, our customer. Number 4, our people. So there you go. Our people are really important. They're 4th on the list, which means you would sacrifice your people before you'd sacrifice your share price. That's what that means.
Yeah.
It's right there, right? and I want to pay you guys big props. When I look at your list of priorities, number one was people. Number one. Number two was customer. And so the fact that you are people-focused first and you recognize that there is a hierarchy,
Yes.
you're fine.
That's awesome. And that was super intentional. I can tell each and every person in that room that was super intentional choice.
That was a big deal.
All right.
Big deal.
So Simon, we're like 30 minutes into our conversation, and I can't believe that we haven't yet gone deep into the topic of Gen AI. It's the theme of this conference. It will be the theme of every conference and event we have for the years and months to come.
AI told us that it would be the theme of the conference because we asked it what the theme should be.
So the good news is that we do think we're at the forefront of leading this dialogue. AI is built into our platform, so we feel like we're in good shape competitively. But if we think more broadly, how do you see Gen AI changing the world of work?
You know what's so fascinating about this, which is we've seen this before, and it was blue-collar manual labor that was the most threatened by advances in technology over the Industrial Revolution and beyond. And if memory serves, I mean, it's like they have suffered more over the course of time, losing their jobs to automation, et cetera, et cetera. And what's fascinating now is the knowledge economy is now going through the same thing. Don't worry, we'll get through it. Will some jobs be lost? 100%, absolutely. Will some jobs change? Yes. And as people, and technologists are big into this, people love to say, 80% of jobs these days didn't exist 30 years ago. Okay, well, let's go 30 years from now. I bet you 80% of the jobs that exist didn't exist now. And so we're freaking out because we're only looking at it in the paradigm that we know. We don't know what the future is going to be. Will there be pain? Of course, there's always pain with new technology. There's going to be. Will there be opportunity? Absolutely. But the things that scare me about Gen AI are less about the workforce, believe it or not, in the workplace. It's more about like deep fakes and democracy, and that scares me way, way more. And we saw it with the internet. The internet offered all these amazing things, and we know the detriments that came with it. The Facebook offered all these amazing things they never expected. No one ever, when they built Facebook, did they think that Facebook would be used to undermine a democracy, Right. I mean, it never occurred to anybody. They weren't prepared for it. Some of that stuff, I think, it would behoove us to start thinking that through now. But I think that if you rage against the machine, you're going to be on the losing side because it's changing. But if you learn to embrace it and sort of treat it as a creative opportunity, you'll be on the cutting edge of it, and it'll do less damage. The example would be best Blockbuster. Back in the day, Blockbuster was the only significant, national DVD rental chain in the country, and there was this upstart little company called Netflix that was experimenting with a new business model called subscription. Remember, you can get the DVDs in the mail. And we knew streaming was coming. The technology wasn't there yet, but we knew what they were doing, which is they were laying the foundation for a model for streaming. Everybody knew that. It was open. And the CEO of Blockbuster at the time went to the board and said, I think we need to look into the subscription model thing. The world is changing. There's a new technology called the interwebs, and I think we need to adapt. And the board would not let him change the business model because the company made 12% of its revenues from late fees. Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. And so it's that kind of protectionist status quo, we got to make the quarter, save the money now. Like, with new technology, you might see a dip in that adjustment. You might have to experiment. But it's actually existential. And Netflix became the 800-pound gorilla, and Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore, simply because of that one tiny little line item. I find that fascinating.
So the fact that we're embracing this change, which is Gen AI,
you're on the cutting edge.
It's the right way, as long as we can manage all those scary downsides.
It's a creative opportunity.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a challenge that I think everybody in this room faces almost every day, but especially our first level and our first line sales leaders. And the topic is prioritization. I've talked to many sales leaders who feel that we've got this great, well-articulated strategy, and we even have some strong, focused initiatives to get there. But by the time that those priorities cascade down to that AE or solution consultant that lives in Boston, London, Tokyo, Sydney, there's way too much on everybody's plate. And that creates what you might call a say-do gap. What advice would you have for our leaders who want to role model all the great stuff that's part of our mission and our 5-star strategy, but they're simply feeling overwhelmed?
Oh, great topic. Two thoughts. One, sort of good leadership modeling. The other one, a little more practical. Okay, the leadership modeling. Talk about it. Talk about it. It's very hard to talk about because it's vulnerable, and a lot of leaders hate the term vulnerability. Vulnerability doesn't mean weak. Vulnerability means revealing things that you're struggling with, right? So you can be vulnerable with confidence. Right? So for example, I can't keep up. I can't keep up. It's just, this is not going well. I can't even like get through my day. Like, your team is gonna freak out at that, right? But if you say, oh, I've got so much on my plate, it's ridiculous. Like, who expects me to be able to keep up with this? It's absolute madness. I gotta figure out a new solution. You're saying the same thing with confidence.
Right.
You just own it. And the ability to be honest about the things you're struggling with has a magical impact. And it goes back to that toxic positivity thing, where if you pretend you're lying, hiding, and faking that you got everything under control because you're trying to inspire your team, they're underwater, they see you totally under control, and they think there's something wrong with them, so it'll destroy their own self-worth. But the minute you start to reveal what you're struggling with, and say, I need help, what that does is it creates an environment where other people can come to you and say, I'm struggling with the same thing, can you help me? And that's what we want. We want people to tell us where they're struggling so we can help them. And I do this. I mean, if I'm really if I'm underwater, I will just, on a team call, I'll be like, hey, folks, you gotta be patient with me. I am so behind, and I'm just not reliable right now. If you ask me to do something, odds are pretty high I'm going to let you down. And so in the short term, I need you to either find another solution, or you just change be more realistic about when I can get back to you. A 3-day deadline has to be like a 1-week deadline or a 2-week deadline, for example. I just need some help. I really need you guys to help me so I can get myself above water again, right? And the amazing thing is, now my team will do the same with me. And that's exactly what I want. Because if I keep it a secret, they'll keep it a secret, and if they keep it a secret, eventually things start to break and crack, and then they start to crumble, and those problems are going to be way worse.
So creating that, if you will, psychological safety
100%.
Around having that conversation, the answer to that prioritization challenge comes out within those conversations.
And we even good, well-intentioned leaders, my door is always open, come to me with all your problems, I'm here to support you, but if they're not modeling the behavior, it's just words.
Okay, I'm looking at our time.
Yeah.
One of the coaching lessons that I got from your team when we were prepping for this panel is A, to be vulnerable up here on the stage, but second was to get into some hard truths. So in this last question that we have in our prepared time, I want to get into maybe what I'd consider a hard truth. And it's that hot button topic of DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we all work in this great high-tech industry that has historically not had a lot of traditional gender and ethnic diversity. At the same time, as Paul mentioned up there on the stage earlier, we're proud of the strides we've made, and we're committed to more sales leader diversity. So if you're one of the sales leaders here in this room, how do you create belonging across an increasingly diverse team?
So it is becoming more diverse, and how do you create belonging? Well, I mean, great organizations are value-based, values-based. And so I think first of all, talking about what your ambitions and vision are, and I'm talking idealized, not what your corporate goals are, but like we imagine a world in which, and asking people to help build that world in the manner that they think it should be built. So in other words, people bringing their own unique points of view to the building of it. But also asking people how we can do better. I think companies that are, especially in tech, that are trying. I think it goes back to that vulnerability. We're not there yet. We're not perfect. We're trying to do what we do, and we need help. And I think asking for help is the best way to do it. And if you allow people who are joining and feel like they don't belong or feel like they're different, what can we do as a company? If I get to raise my hand and say, here's what I think you should do, is a very powerful thing. And I've heard in tech before, it's like, well, there's no pipeline. We'd love to hire more, but there's no pipeline. Like we just don't get the applicants. So then go into schools and teach kids who don't look like you. But, the pipeline may not exist today, but why don't you build a pipeline so in 10 years there's a great pipeline?
So if you find yourself in this visionary future where you have this great diverse team, and that's diversity on all levels, gender, ethnic, diversity of thought, you name it. How do you what are some tactics that you've seen leaders do to create belonging when you have these people coming from these different backgrounds?
Again, it's about shared vision, right? And if you think about our nation, which is complicated and complex and imperfect and struggling at all times throughout its history, but for some reason we cling on to this ideal that was laid down for us in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, that all people are created equal. And you see a nation struggling and striving to get there. Sometimes we take a few steps back, but you see us pushing. And so I think we have a desperate need in our corporate world today to bring idealism back into business, right? We've seemed to have lost idealism from our political leaders. If you go back to Ronald Reagan or John F. Kennedy, I don't care what your politics are, they both literally use the terms world peace, peace on earth in their inaugural addresses, right? To talk about world peace now sounds corny. It literally sounds cheesy to say those words. And if you think about it, all the great idealists, George Eastman, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, these folks had visions of the world that were naive and impossible, but damn it, they were going to die trying to build those worlds that they imagined. And I think we need idealism back in our nation and idealism back in our country. CEOs don't speak in idealized visionary terms. Vision is just that. It's like, I can see it in my imagination. I have a dream is a vision. It's idealism. And we are in a very magical period in our nation right now, if not in the world, where people, this is not a good statistic, but it is a statistic, that people trust business leaders more than almost any other kind of leader. Like, we don't trust our politicians at all. We don't trust clergy as much. We don't trust authority figures, police. Trust is so low in these traditionally highly respected and highly trusted industries. But corporate America is unbelievably trusted right now, which means that corporate America can actually change the world, which means if you model and you start speaking in idealized terms of the world that you imagine, and you commit your culture and you commit your business to be one of the things that will help advance towards that ideal vision, the ripples inspire a nation, repair wounds, and actually move us to world peace.
Wow. Amazing.
Which is why I wanted to be here, frankly. I know who you are. I know what your culture is. I know what your values are. Seeing people, number one, the pride you have in training your people, teaching them human skills, building better human beings, the fact that you put grow self, grow team, grow company in that order, that these are your mantras, these are your rallying cries, like, yes, they're corporate. Yes, they're intended to help drive growth. Yes, all those things, yes. But what you have to understand is that by modeling those behaviors as a company, you're modeling those behaviors for a nation. Because if you have those priorities and you go home and instill those priorities in your kids, that their friends come before their grades, right? Like looking after your friends in need and learning to cooperate is sometimes more important than the number, the number, the number, the number. If you're on a sports team, helping somebody who fell over is sometimes more important than winning the game. These are coming from work. Those values that you're taking home are coming from work. If your work is pounding you and pounding you and pounding you like your competitors, guess what values you take at home? Exhaustion, I don't have time for you, I can't come to your baseball game because I have to work. Those are the values that you bring home. And I don't think you realize how powerful what you're doing is and the positive ripples you're having in the communities in which you operate.
Thank you. I love that. We kind of ended on this note of idealism, and I'll tie it back to how we started with the topic of optimism. What a great way to kind of end this part of our discussion. So thank you so much, Simon.
My pleasure.
Guys, I know you've been riveted just like I have over the past 45 minutes or so, but we promised that we'd save some time to get some questions from the audience. So I know there's someone out there who I can't see who's going to tee up a next set of questions. So we have the first one coming through already, and feel free, guys, to use the QR code to continue to submit questions. So the question looks like it's about complacency. What does complacency mean to you, and what can we do to address it when we see it?
Great question. Complacency can take many forms. Laziness is one of them. Lying, hiding, and faking is another one. But we don't know which one it is. Stress could be another one. Poorly trained, afraid. There's many reasons people are complacent. And the problem is when we label it as laziness or stupid, and then when we're talking amongst our peers and that person's name comes up, and we go, oh, so frickin' lazy, right? Now we're creating a narrative about a person, and those other leaders will treat that person as lazy, and damage will be done. Because we've now created a narrative for a person. It's called gossip. My favorite company, there's one company I know where gossip is a fireable offense. And so, number one, if you're amongst leaders and that starts to happen, number one, we catch each other. Wait. They might be lazy, or they might be going through this. So why don't we just back off a second? By the way, we don't like it when people create narratives about us being horrible and toxic and aggressive and all these things. So it goes both ways, but we have to model behavior. Empathy is king, empathy is king. So here's what no empathy looks like in a corporate environment. And it directly addresses something like complacency. You walk into someone's office, or you Zoom with them, and your numbers are down for the third quarter in a row. We've had this conversation before. If you don't pick up your numbers, I don't know what's going to happen. That's very often how we address complacency. Now let's infuse empathy into that. Your numbers are down for the third quarter in a row. We've had this conversation before. Are you okay? I'm worried about you. What's going on? Very,
Such
very
a different dialogue.
So the way I like to address complacency is with empathy. Very often the truth is revealed. 99 times out of 100, we can support or we can coach. And my rule is, if someone is uncoachable, then that's a different conversation. So that's when laziness or true complacency will be revealed, is when they reject coaching or support.
I think what I keep hearing from you, Simon, is you've got to go deeper and deeper at the root of why you're getting that behavior.
I mean, it's replace judgment with curiosity. We are judgy. Yeah. We can't help ourselves. And then you have generational judginess. In my day, you know. And there's a lot to be judgmental about these days.
You opened up another can of worms.
A lot to be judgmental about. But it's still, you know, even if it's hard and even if we don't understand, to be curious is a great place to start. And it goes back to what we said before about if we have to let people go and we do it with dignity. If somebody's struggling and we treat them as if we treat them as lazy, they will shut down. And it's going to become self-fulfilling. Like their performance will never pick up, and we'll say, see. But by simply offering somebody the ability to feel seen and heard and give them a second chance, very, very often those people become our biggest supporters, our best employees, and our best leaders. It is amazing to see the turnarounds at those people, because somebody believed in me, and so now I'm going to pay it forward to everybody who works for me.
I love that. 90% plus of people are coachable. Great takeaway.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go to the next question. How can we as leaders find our why and help our teams find their why?
Oh my God, it's like you set me up for that one. Okay, so this wasn't intended to be a TV commercial, but thank you for the setup. We're actually developing a product to train the trainer to actually teach your people how to help your people find their why, so that we're not the only people who can do it, because I want as many people to find their why as possible. So that product is 80% done, so it's almost out if that interests you. But I can teach you a fun way to find your why right now, for you individually. It's called the friends exercise. Think of a friend you love and who loves you. Somebody who you would be there for them at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know that if you called them at 3 o'clock in the morning, they would take your call, right? Do not do this with a spouse. Do not do this with a parent. Do not do this with a sibling. Those relationships are too close. Do this with a best friend, okay? And ask them this simple question: why are we friends? And they're going to look at you like you're insane. Because the part of the brain that controls our feelings, love, loyalty, or love, not well, lust too, I guess, but love, loyalty, trust, doesn't control language, which is why we struggle to put our feelings into words. And so you stop asking the question why, because why elicits emotional responses, and you want rational responses. It's like you ask your kids, why are you home late? You'll get a very different answer. Shut up, Dad. You'll, you know. But if you say, what were you doing that you're home late, you'll get an answer. So the minute they say, you're insane, why are you asking me this? I don't know. You start asking what? Come on. What specifically is it about me that I know that you would be there for me no matter what? And they'll start describing you. I don't know. You're always there for me. I trust you. Like you're good to me. And you play devil's advocate. That's just the definition of a friend. What specifically is it about me that I know you'd be there for me no matter what? And they'll go through this a few times. That's the difference. You have that from many people. What specifically is it about? They're going to hate you. It's going to hurt sometimes. Don't help them. Don't let anybody help them. And eventually they will give up. And they will start describing themselves. And this is what my friends said to me. They said, I don't know, Simon. All I know is I don't even have to talk to you. I can just sit in a room with you and I feel inspired. And I got goosebumps. In fact, I'm getting them right now. What they will do is they will put into words the value you have in their life, and you will have an emotional response. You will either well up with tears or you will get goosebumps, and that's how you know you found your why. Because it's deep, deep, deep seated inside who you are. And who you are is the value you have in the world. And if you do it with multiple friends, which I did, you will get very similar, if not the exact same thing, because the thing you give to the people who love you is the value that you have in their lives, which is your why. So give that a try.
Love that. Love that. All right. So Simon, we said we weren't going to make the outline of this conversation be about your books, but we just talked about the why. The next question's about the infinite game. How can we bring the principles of the infinite game into how we sell?
So good. Okay. Not all sales calls have to result in a sale that day. And sometimes it's the relationship, right? I'll give you a perfect example. I needed some wallpaper done in my house, and I called a friend of mine and said, do you have a wallpaper guy? She goes, oh my God, I have the best wallpaper guy. Call Lalo. I went, okay. Called Lalo, I need wallpaper. Can you come over and give me an estimate? Lalo comes over, I show him the wallpaper, which I'd already bought, and Lalo says, I don't do paste. I can't do this kind of wallpaper. So first of all, he didn't lie. He could have lied to me and watched a YouTube video, I guess. He says, I don't do paste, but I'll give you somebody who does. And he gave me somebody who turned out to be excellent. And when the guy said, how'd you get my number? I said, oh, I got it from Lalo. He said, I met Lalo once. I've never worked with the guy. Lalo knew his reputation. My sister needed some wallpaper. And she said, do you have a wallpaper guy? And I said, you gotta call Lalo. Because he was so honest and such a nice guy. Is it paste? She goes, no. I said, call Lalo. Lalo comes over. It turns out he did a brilliant job. So we say, hey, Lalo, what else do you do? He goes, oh, I can do anything. He says, can you do tiles? I'm like, I can do tiles. My sister had her whole kitchen retiled. Did a brilliant job. I bought a house. I said, Lalo, you want to do some renovations for me? He goes, yeah, I'd love to. Lalo did my whole renovation. Brilliantly. Mm-hmm. My point is he didn't feel the need to make the close that day. Yep. Being of high value, being honest and being helpful, putting my needs before his, we've given him hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of business. Amazing. Between us and the people we've recommended him to.
It was how he made you feel.
It was how he made us feel.
Yeah.
And so, people want to feel that you care about them and their needs. Mm-hmm. If they feel that, because remember, sometimes they're not in control, especially in the corporate world. Sometimes they're not in control of making the decision. Sometimes it's an outside pressure. Sometimes somebody's brother-in-law from the other company pitched. Right. I mean, there's a million reasons not to get the business. But if we're adult about it and we're still helpful, it always comes around.
Love that.
Karma's a boomerang, right?
All right, so guys, we have one last question from the audience, and it's actually, in my opinion, it's awesome. So Simon, you mentioned a lot of incredible leadership examples in your speeches and in your literature. Who is your ultimate hero, and why?
I don't know if I have an ultimate hero. There are people who are my heroes. Mm. And I guess my ultimate hero would be my grandfather. That's a different conversation. But there are people who are my heroes, and almost all of them are not famous. Like, nobody knows who they are. Like my friend Johnny Bravo, like my friend Bob Chapman, like my friend Mickey, like my friend Rick. These are people who are super high values. My friend Tom, super, super high values. Christina. And we obey the same rules, which is they love me and I can feel it. When I can't do something, feel stuck, or it touches all my insecurities, I can tell them openly, and they don't judge me, but they support me. And the leadership lessons that I have learned from these magical, magical human beings, the only way I can repay them, other than being there for them, is to take their lessons and pay them forward. Just like I said before, the greatest value you have at this event is each other. Please recognize that leadership is a team sport, that none of us can lead by ourselves. It is just far too difficult. It is just like being a parent is too difficult to do alone, which is why preferably we have a partner, but we rely on our own parents and our friends, and we're constantly asking and reading books. You just can't do it alone. You need support and advice. Mm-hmm. And leadership is exactly the same. If I beg of each of you, if you don't already, which I'm sure many of you do, make sure you have a leadership buddy at work, somebody you can call and be like, I can't. You need someone to vent to. You need someone to vent to. You need someone to scream and yell and just get it out of your system. You need somebody who'd be like, how do I do this? And most importantly, and all of my friends know this, I have a very strong rule, a strict rule with all my friends, which is never cry alone. And when you are overwhelmed and you need to just let it out, you pick up the phone, and I'll tell you one quick story. I have a dear, dear friend who's going through a very hard time, my friend Maria. And I went to her house for dinner, and she was better now. And we were catching up, and she was telling me about this awful time she went through. And I wanted to be sympathetic, but at the same time, I was really pissed off that she didn't call me. And I was like, what the hell? Like, I'm here, I love you, I support you. Like, you're always there for me. Why wouldn't you let me be there for you? Like, how selfish are you? Like, you wouldn't let me be there for you. She says to me, I did. I reached out to you a number of times. I said, no, you didn't. And I look at my phone, like the text. She goes, want to come over? I'm like, how the hell do I know that that's a cry for help versus every other time you ask me over, which sounds exactly the same? And so she read an article that says that when somebody's struggling, all they need is 8 minutes of help or support from a friend to get them back on track. And so we came up with a code, which any of us is like, what are you doing? Want to come over for dinner? Blah, blah, blah. Let's chat later. Fine. But when we write to each other, do you have 8 minutes? It means I need you.
Love it.
and anybody can step out of a meeting for 8 minutes to be there for a friend.
Love
There
that.
you go.
Simon, I can't believe our time has come to the end. Shout out to the audience for those amazing questions.
Great questions.
I think I'm supposed to ask you one more. Do we have time? Okay, I think I heard one yes, so we'll go with it.
The person who screamed out yes is not the meeting planner.
I know, that came from that side. There were,
Stage manager's like,
I loved your ending story, but I'm going to ask one last question here as we wrap up. What's that one piece of advice for this group here to set us up for success in 2024 and beyond?
ask for help.
Ask for help. Simple. Love it. All right, guys. Simon, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. It was a real
Appreciate
treat.
you being
It was a
here.
real treat. Thanks so much, Vanessa. I really appreciate it.